And welcome to the February 5th Lifeboat Academy Coordination Circle, our first coordination circle of the new year. And the focus of this circle is actually on our plan for the year. And as is our usual custom, we start with a land acknowledgement. So I will start with that reminder that we begin by acknowledging the land because the land was here before we were. The land will continue to be here long after we are gone. And everything that we need to survive and thrive comes from the land and returns to the land, including each cell of our body and our bodies in total. And so in acknowledging the land, we are leaning on ancient indigenous wisdom that comes from multiple cultures and which has been developed across cultures because it makes sense, it works. And what works about it is basically acknowledging anytime we gather that there is something bigger that we are a part of. And so before we get down to the items on the agenda, we remind ourselves that we're a part of something much larger, something much older, something much larger, something much wiser. And in acknowledging that, we also acknowledge our role, which is we are the recipients of an inexpressible bounty by being here on this planet. And the only thing that is asked of us in return is we care for the things that care for us. And so this is also a reminder that we are all to leave the place a little better than we found it, and that we are to heal any harms that we might come across that are within our capacity to heal, that we do everything in our power to avoid causing any new harm, and that we take care of all our relations as a way of taking care of ourselves. So we do what we can where we can, when we can to make the place a little bit better. And in doing so, we also acknowledge specifically that a great number of harms have happened to those indigenous cultures who are the keepers of that wisdom. And so we have a special place in the caring that we do to heal the harms between communities, our communities and indigenous communities, um, and between our communities and the larger living whole. So with that, I invite us just to take a moment to ground ourselves into the long day towards the end of a week. So just take a moment, close your eyes if that feels right, go off camera if that feels right, and just take a moment to remind yourself of being a body in a place. Feel the weight of your body pressing down on the seat and the ground coming up to support you. Take a moment in your mind's eye just to see yourself in your landscape. See yourself in the room, and the room in the building, and the building on the land. And in your mind's eye, just sort of scan around, use the compass points to remind yourself what lies to the north and to the east and to the south and to the west. All those connections, all those relations in every direction, and you here in the middle. So when you're ready, I invite you just to take a breath or two, breathing in the energy that comes from those connections, exhaling, letting go of anything that keeps you from being present. And when you're ready, come join us back in the circle. Okie dokie. So check-in question. We're just past Imbolc, so it's Imbolc week. Happy Imbolc week. And Imbolc is about the indwelling, the new life in the heart of the winter that's gestating and getting ready for spring. So my check-in question is, what's gestating for you? And the circle, as I see it, is April, Roland, and me. So, April, what's currently gestating?
Curiosity about what little green sprouts are going to actually physically pop up in my container garden. And over to Roland, I guess.
You're muted. Oh, no, you're not.
No, I'm not. I'm just trying to feel into the question. Hmm, interesting. That is interesting. And I'm going to pass to Ben.
Let's see. What is gestating with me? Actually, the growing season. I think we've had a couple woofer interviews, and the weather today is sunny and beautiful, and we've spent a little time outside. So my brain is moving towards those kinds of thoughts. Cool. Well, what I am proposing for today is I've really only got one agenda item, and I was going to propose our normal North Star. We take a moment just to revisit where we are and what we're doing together. And then after that, we put together a roadmap for 2026. So, which has been a product of a couple different processes. And, but basically just kind of going over that for feedback and see whether that all makes sense. Just to see my cameras messed up. And, so anything else to add to the agenda? And we'll just popcorn if you raise your hand if you got something to add. Alrighty. Um, so let me uh start. I'm gonna share screen and oh actually I guess I don't need to share that. I'll just take notes as we do our conversation. And we'll do the standard format, which is any or all of the questions. What is it we're trying to accomplish together? Why is that important? And where are we now? And we'll do one round where we each get a chance to respond, or to respond, and then one round where we can reflect on what we're hearing. So, and you can always pass, and we'll come back to you. So no pressure. So over to you, April. What is it we are trying to do together? And why is that important? Where are we now? Any part or all of those?
Um, I think we're trying to learn how to think collectively and maybe live collectively and figure out how to pass on the learning about that to other people. And are we in the regular circle, myself, Roland, and then you?
Mhm. Yeah.
Okay, great. So over to Roland.
Really big picture. I think that we are um, unlearning systems that are divisive and harmful, and learning to build systems that are um, connected to our ecosystem, our relations, and our human animalness. Big picture, picture. And I noticed that apparently the old system lives on this side and the new system lives on this side because I was turning my head as I was going to the second part, in case you were wondering. Over to Ben.
Well-known fact. Old, new.
No, no, old, new.
Old, new.
Yes, yes.
Old, new.
Oh, no.
Um, yeah, both of those I think pretty much cover it. Learning to unlearn to relearn. Um, so I think I'll go into the why that's important. Just to say the obvious. Um, Look at the news, and I think that we are witnessing the when the inherent harmfulness and divisiveness of our systems reach their limits. And and I think it's important that we're doing this work now in particular because there is a ticking clock. There is a certain physical reality about material limits that we are up against. And the old idea of it takes a long time to change course on a cruise ship. And so those of us that are at the wheel right now are pulling as hard as we can and to try to get the corrections to happen. So yeah, it's important, I'd say, because of timeliness. And so we've each had a chance to share, and we'll go once through and we can just what are you noticing? What are you hearing? Anything stand out for you? So April, over to you.
Well, for me, and maybe for all of us here today, I'm having thoughts about I've always been a systems thinker and an observer of what goes on, and I'm much more firmly moving into being a systems builder, I guess. Um, and so there's lots of implications around what that might mean for actions and tenacity. And over to Roland.
What I'm noticing is um, I don't know how to put it, acknowledging that um, so God is change, so everything is always changing, but we cling to the illusion that things don't change and try to keep things from changing. And what I'm hearing is that we are acknowledging that change is happening and change is needed at the same time. Over to Ben.
Yeah, yeah, and that's it's interesting. I think both of those kind of go together in terms of um, I think the acknowledgement. I think I can go back to the gestation question too, because one of the things that is alive for me right now is, April, you were talking about being a systems builder, and I think it's more sort of a systems magnifier. And likewise with the acknowledgement of change that we can resist, but resistance is futile, and we're really just acknowledging things as they are. And and that's challenging, I think, because there's some maturation. Um, Bill Plotkin talks about how we are an adolescent culture, and part of that adolescent, and it really does match. It's I never knew as much as I did when I was an adolescent, right? I had complete access to the mind of God and a complete map of how the world is and should be and what needed to happen. And part of the maturation is to realize that, you know, uh, turns out there's some gaps in my knowledge and understanding and agency and all that kind of stuff. So, um, uh, yeah, anyhow, I think that's all by way of saying that part of that maturation is to move from thinking that we are the designers to realizing that we're just the collaborators in whatever is going to happen. Oh, cool. Well, then let's get into talking about our roadmap. And I will share for this. And and obviously this is still a draft, it's still a work in progress. And I'll start by saying the sources of this were in the fall, we went through and we did an annual review where we looked back over what we did in 2025, tried to identify accomplishments and what was emerging, lessons learned, that sort of thing. Um, Simultaneously, and we've taken that work forward by thinking about if that was our report from last year, what makes sense moving forward, and coming up with some RFPs as is our normal process. We've been just, explicitly scaling down how much we've been asking of other people on the steering committee and other people who've been involved in the lifeboat, um, in part in response to, I think, the taxes on people's nervous system lately. Um, and so trying to figure out how we do this as lightly as possible, but still getting something meaningful out of it. So we developed some RFPs as a result of that process, and actually, we were carrying in the fall, one of the last big things that we were working on was the Marketing for Hippies framework. And that really was weaving together a whole bunch of work that was happening around messaging and clarifying what it was we're doing and figuring out how to talk about this in a way that other people can understand more easily. So that was kind of two tracks there that came together. And then the third track was the Finance and Fundraising Guild has continued to do a lot of work, and we've finalized the bylaws, I think maybe finally. And every time we think we've finalized them, there's one more thing. But we've got a letter out an email out to the lawyers for a final review of the draft. And the Finance Guild has also kind of evolved and had conversations about, now that the bylaws are finalized, what do we do to move that forward? So now that we've got this thing that we can implement, how do we go through the implementation process? And we developed a sort of an action plan for the Finance Guild. And this is a summary of those three streams coming together. And so we have, what is this, six kind of high level action areas. First one, securing the land. How do we move towards actually having long-term secure tenure? Similarly, resourcing the lifeboat, which is parallel to securing the land. How do we also make sure that we have the resources, the money, and the material that we need to be able to keep the lifeboat afloat? Living invitations, which is kind of the latest morph of outreach. How do we get the word out there in some ways to engage people? Coming back to our lifeboat builder cohort, are we going to have one for this year, and how do we get that going? And then the continued focus on the Pharmastery guests, and both the key thing this year. It's last year, you can imagine 2025 was using woofers to prototype and refine our retreat package. And this year, the goal is, how do we move that from being a thing that woofers come and do to something that's actually an offering, that so it ties in with the resourcing the lifeboat as a potential income source. And then and likewise also as an income source, the what is the offering that the Lifeboat Academy has that this is really the short, sharp, and shiny experiments, and how do we move that into an offering that is paying for itself, at least. So those are kind of our high level areas. Any questions at that before we go into the details? Questions, comments?
I have a comment. I like how this has been um, slimmed down into those categories, and I think that really gives a forward-looking frame. So whoever did that, good work.
You're pointing at April. Well, it was a joint process, and but I'm the one who put it all in Asana. So there, that was me. So when we break them down, each one of them has just a few key action items. Um, I think it always goes without saying, the short-term plan is fairly clear, and the longer-term plan is, of course, a little bit fuzzier depending on what happens in the short-term plan. So, one of the first things is to reconnect with Steph and find out where she is now, what are her practical needs. In particular, one of the things that in terms of, um, we're looking at options for securing the land, both 2026 security and beyond that. And we are at a place where so that's we're trying to figure out what would Steph need for some sort of security, um, and what would we need? Yeah, would we be in a position to, give her what she needs? Um, then obviously outreach to investors, and we've got this sort of uh, broken down much more. What's the word? Granularly. Um, And we probably actually have the specific list to approach in each category. So we've got big investors, timeshare croppers, and network hosts. And there is a logic to the strategy, which is the big investors are the ones who can write a check and make it happen. They are going to want some uh, or they will be more comfortable writing a check if they also understand that there are some smaller investors who are willing to take part, but the smaller investors probably can't carry it on their own. So part of the reason for looking for timeshare croppers is to be able to say, look, we're not alone. There are some other people willing to put money on the line, even if it's not the big money. And likewise, outreach to the network nodes, which is part of the living invitations, is to the degree that we can show people are interested in coming here and taking part in the retreats, then this is a more secure investment. So that's why it's kind of there's multiple tracks in doing that. And then the last is really just incorporating. We have to figure out, it looks like our bylaws are good as they are. We we don't want to delay anymore, but there are some technical questions about the share value in the bylaws from the start. So we just have some, basically getting some advice on that. And the creating the four more one pagers, that's actually old and I think we can delete it, but it's part of the outreach. We've got a lot of materials already prepared. So we have the materials we need for the outreach. We just need to do the outreach. So resourcing the lifeboat, one of the early steps, we've already put together an operating budget of, this is what our normal operating expenses are. We're looking at, we've already created, but we haven't fleshed out an improvements budget, which is, if we had this much more money, we could do these things. And then also looking at where some of the income pathways might be, and trying to get more realistic about that. Um, And part of the resourcing also is trying to find more support for Roland and I. That we have backup here, that we're not the only ones running the show all summer. And we have, I don't, did we tell you, we've had some conversations with a couple different potential caretakers. Um, one, and, you know, they're all, there's no, there's no certainty that this is all very exploratory. I would say for both of them, they are people that we know, they've been to visit, they've done some work on the farm. One in particular, I'm quite hopeful that they become a caretaker with us. There's a really good fit. One of the other ones, I think there's a good fit. We don't know them quite as well yet, but it seemed like there was a good fit. So we're putting that in a resource category because of sort of human resources. And then also along with that is some plan B planning, just so that Roland and I are not feeling so precarious, or, you know, have backups. So, you know, where can we land if needs be? So actually, well, no, let's do the whole thing because some of them interact. So I'll go through the whole thing and then we can talk through questions and things. So the living invitations is really, it's just the evolution of our outreach. We want to update the website based on the Marketing for Hippies uh, framework. So making it really clear about who this is for and who it's not, and what the offers are, so that the raw material is already prepared. It's just a matter of literally doing the changes to the website. This is in that category of, I can't believe it's February, but we also had a plan for a kind of a New Year's newsletter, and kind of where we are now, which still makes sense. I just had hoped it had gone out earlier, but, you know, here we are. And then, and I think we can probably boost this, scheduling events so the Marketing for Hippies, part of their strategy is we already have offerings in the form of webinars or talks. So we've got the short, sharp, and shiny experiments. We've got the how to build your lifeboat. We've got a Sociocracy 101, a couple other things that are navigating via tensions. So we have a menu of content that is valuable to people. And we also have relationships with people who represent larger networks. So the question is, or the process is that we approach people and we say, would you be interested in hosting one of these webinars to your people? And um, recently I worked with Aiden to refine that menu. So we now actually have a really nice menu of options that are really connected to timeshare croppers who might be, if this network is talking to people who are likely to be timeshare croppers, this is probably the content they're going to be most interested in. If we're talking to investors, this might be the content that they're most interested in. And so we can actually pair the network with the content that we think will open up the conversation. So the idea is, if we can get people to host these events, we can present what we're doing, and then that becomes an opportunity to get some engagement. Um, and then actually curious what, yeah. And I think I'm pretty confident. I'm going to be doing how to navigate via tensions in 2 weeks at the CHFBC Co-op Housing Federation of BC in Victoria. You have the event for the violence, the anti-violence group, and so I think that there are going to be more than two or three, but that was a number to put out as a starting point. And then Lifeboat Builder activation. This is really about how do we reach out to, do we want to do a 2026 Lifeboat Builder cohort? And we have a different offering based on, so we've already created a one-page offering, and we're proposing a different format this year based on the learning from last year. And part of the learning from last year was we didn't get much follow through. We got people who were interested, people who came to events and they liked the events, but it didn't translate into an action plan for their own projects. So we're kind of front loading that this year, and it's less about come to this event and it's more setting up one-on-one time to talk with them about what is it you're looking to do and kind of setting up a coaching relationship. And then from those people who are interested in the coaching relationship, then we bring them together and uh, it becomes more of a support. So the offering, the one pager is already available for review for what it is we think we're offering. And oh, and the other thing too is the plan is to reach out to all of the people who have been interested or engaged as lifeboat builders with this year's offering as a draft and basically saying, this is what we're thinking about doing this year. Would this be something you're interested in? And is it something that you think other people might be interested in? And there's a couple details in there to talk about, but that's that. And then the Pharmastery guest, this is, I would say, sort of underdeveloped at this point, but how do we start to convert visits into income? The thought I had actually, this is news to Roland as well, but when we were at Valley Home, we just did Airbnb and it worked a treat. And Airbnb has since augmented their offerings, so they actually have things now that are more like experiences and less like hotel rooms. So one of the ways could just be putting this on something like Airbnb. And then, we can talk about the practicality and the ethics of what platform we might post it on. But at this point right now, we've got some technical things about how do we manage bookings and that sort of thing to work on, but we haven't really fleshed that out in any kind of detail. And then lastly, the self-governance. Partly I have my, there's who is it? William S. Burroughs who says kill your darlings. When you're writing, that you come up with these little pet things that you think are so clever. This is my latest pet thing that is one of my darlings that might need to get killed. But uh, I've been really thinking the core of what we're doing is about classrooms for self-governance. This is riffing on de Tocqueville's The Classrooms of Democracy, local neighborhood associations as the where the learning actually happens. And it feels to me like this is really the core of what we're talking about, and it's relevant more generically. It's not, and that's we're not focused on the content of, whatever group you're trying to work. We just want to figure out how to help it be self-governing. And that my part one and part two of um, the what kind of sets this up is there are some qualities that lead to good classrooms and some qualities that lead to bad classrooms. And a lot of what we're talking about are how to put the supports around and it can be done with an existing group or it could be with a new group. So that one it feels much more sort of doable than the Pharmastery guests, or it seems more clear, which is really we've got our short, sharp, and shiny protocol, and it's just trying to figure out. And actually, I think we already have EAPO is we can say that's one of them. That would count already. But if we can find a couple other pilots, and at this point, I mean, I think we can call them pilots but in some sense, they're not pilots at all. I think we kind of, this is what we've been doing, and it's just a way of marketing it, clarifying what the offering is. And I think the experiments offering page is almost written already. That was actually part of the marketing for hippies stuff. Like, here's what we do, and here's what we don't do, and here's what, and I think we now have it in the language of we do this and you do this. That there is a set of expectations about what engagement looks like. So, that is the roadmap draft that we have brought today. And so I'm going to suggest that we go once through for comments, questions, whatever, and then we'll just keep going to depending on where that conversation goes. So April, over to you.
Well, it seems to me these are strategic goals that fit the ethos and the practice that exists, and that we just need to cascade then into deeper into more and more details at each level. I think it's the right stuff. And I think framing it in the way that these have been framed is really useful. I'm particularly interested in the self-governance as a service right now, because internally that's exactly what I'm doing at BCCRNs too. Yeah, those are my comments. Over to Roland.
Well, I always appreciate how you're able to rationalize and organize all of our conversations in a way that can be more easily understood. And I don't really have anything to add other than to express appreciation for how it's organized. I'm wondering about uh, would it be too soon to kind of go through them and start to think about um, uh, action things to do so that we have a little menu of things that we can pick from. Um, yeah, and I think it is it's uh, the way that it's organized is ready for that. Makes it easy. So over to Ben.
Yeah, I feel like I'm gonna expand everything just so that we can, um, because we do have some action items here. The
I just realized I'm not quite done.
Okay.
I just realized one of my questions actually with this is that um, uh, suddenly after saying starting to break down for things to do, I got this wave of overwhelm because right now, with the exception of a few things around finance, the Finance Guild, it is Ben and myself who are doing everything, and it's a lot. Um, and so I am suddenly feeling incredibly overwhelmed because we don't have really any help. And it suddenly seems like a whole lot of stuff. So what to do about that
Mhm.
without giving myself more things to do? Over
Over
to
to
Ben.
me.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that's my thought too. I mean, a lot of this, we were really clear as we put this together, or there was an intention to make sure that this was doable within like the limited resources that we have, your time and my time, and maybe a little help here and there. Um, and yeah, that's one of my, and there's um a little bit of chicken and the egg, if we could get lifeboat builders engaged, we could get some help from lifeboat builders as part of the lifeboat building. If we can get some investors, then they are going to be more interested in what's going on, and we can get some help from them. And so uh, yeah, and I have the same, and I don't really know what to do about it. Um, we keep addressing, we put out invitations and people say, what about this? And we do something to address that. And we're still waiting for people to show up. And it does feel to me like, um, and I don't know, maybe this is overstatement too. It feels like a lot of people right now are just like at capacity, just trying to get through the week, you know? Um, so I'm hesitant to make more demands. And at the same time, there's this part of me that's like, this is, all the people that are saying, what do we do? What do we do? Oh my God, the sky's falling. What do we do? And we're like, this is what you do. You know, and they're like, no, but not that. But what do we do? And so yeah, I have that same concern about um how do what do we need to do to get the support coming in around this? And it is really frustrating, it feels like everyone's waiting for the other person, like are the people that we're talking to about uh, joining the lifeboat, like as caretakers. One of their big concerns, one of them is like, well, but I want to do something now and know that I can just land and get going. So it's the same problem that we've had in the past where they're sort of hesitant to cast their lot with us because we don't have it secured. But if they cast their lot with us, we could probably secure it. It's that anyhow. Yeah, so I share the same concern. So I think I'll just pass over to April. Fix it,
Well,
April.
okay, that's fine. I'll take care of this. Just send me the list and you know, um, I a couple of things. Yeah, there's lots of stuff here, but it's all growing in the right way. It's just like having a garden that, all the peas are coming all at once and you can't see the tomatoes because the peas are there and you have to deal with them. Um, which we manage to navigate every year, really, and whatever we're growing. So there is a way. Uh, I think prioritizing what absolutely must be done in uh, the next month, the next 2 months, and that has to be at the top of the list of what gets attended to, even if it's not our favoriteest things. The second thing is to continue messaging out to everybody we know and iterative messaging with the same message. If you want to find a direction, if you want to be productive instead of just worrying, if you want to sample tried and true ways of doing things better, talk to us now. Now. Um, it's time to call for a commitment.
Mhm.
And that may or may not separate out people that aren't ready to commit. It may just give us a whole bunch of people who are kind of scared and don't know what to do, but are willing to at least sit together. But I think, the same stuff. And if we look at where we were a year ago, how we were talking, what we were talking about, and what we thought we'd accomplished, compared to now, it's a different conversation, but with the same underpinnings, I
Mhm.
believe. Um, and I think we need to say to people, think like a neighbor. If you were our
Mhm.
neighbor, how would we be thinking together?
Mhm.
Um, and use that as kind of a metaphor. And, just keep putting out both the invitation and the responsibility that this means. We want to be closer with you, everybody that we know who's on our list. That means this and this and this. And so, what part would you like to be part of? And not even just try to attract people's attention or whatever. Just here we are. Here's the thing. Here's the deal. When do we meet?
Mhm.
When do I come to your living room? When is your driveway open so we can stand out there like a bunch of neighbors and talk together? Uh, Whatever. So I think people are looking for that even more than they're looking for how do I build my lifeboat. Like that's an outcome of that. But the being seen, being a neighbor, and then developing the neighborliness is what a lot of people are needing. And you're right, there's a lot of people. I mean, if we thought last year that people's central nervous system was a little frayed, it's there's hurts and harms now as compared to
Mhm.
the frayedness. So anything that says stand with us, we'll stand with you if you stand with us. So those are two things that I would say. Over to my colleague Roland.
Sorry, I missed most of that because I had a request from a puppy dog to go out. Um,
It was
so
profound.
yep. Well, Ben took notes,
Yep.
so um, I think I'll just pass for now.
Cool. Well, and um, my sense of priorities, I have this feeling like we now and I it is useful to go back a year, go back 2 years, go back 3 years. And I think last year there was a lot of sort of like the farm. It's actually kind of remarkable to me to think last year we thought we should try a retreat. And that was our goal was maybe we could do 1 or 2 retreats. And obviously it didn't go according to plan, but it now I feel like we've got retreats in the bag. I think we've got everything that we need to be able to offer them. Likewise with relationships, I feel like I think what I'm feeling is we have untapped potential, both in terms of the the communication materials and the relationships. And so I agree it's the priorities, and the priorities that come up for me. One is which in the category of not my favorite thing, updating the website, um, so that we have, and especially I was thinking right now, a lot of the Substack and the Medium posts, which are really relevant to what we're talking about, it's impossible for people to find them without it coming up and being directed right away. So there's a lot of information there that I think both in terms of, and that was the other thing for marketing for hippies, it does a really good job about the, you know, it's not a funnel, but it's a funnel in terms of there's preparedness. People are in different stages and you can't push a rope. And one of the things, this is in the work that Roland and I are doing with Aiden independently, we keep getting the same thing, which is people with activated nervous systems are not open to anything at all. So the first job is how do you calm their nervous system? And we've got some pieces that can help calm, just read this and this can help. And, giving people some of that sense of orientation. And then the other thing is I also feel like working the networks to be able to get in front of people to be able to talk to them. Because when we talk about what we're doing, people are very receptive to it. And I think now we've got it feels mechanical in a good way. There's like option one, option two, and option three. You know, it's here's how you, if this sounds interesting, here's what you can do. And April, your comment about that iterative, repetitive messaging is really hard for me, because I I have like I don't want to bore people and I want to say something new and I want to move on to the next idea and all that kind of stuff. But I think there really is this kind of like um changing the flavor of it a little bit, but it really is it's the same structure. Um and yeah, so that's I think where I would put the priorities would be reaching out through the networks to do presentations and figuring out ways we can talk to people. So having that menu of, would you be willing to host this for your people with a clear, if somebody is interested, here's the next step. And it's really, if this is interesting, give me your email. I'll send you a link. We'll set up a time to talk. Like that's, kind of um, that's almost always the next step. And then here's some other things you can do. So yeah, yeah. I had an interesting exchange with Aiden just yesterday talking about it helped clarify for me that uh, I'm feeling something similar to frustration, but it's not frustration in that it feels like what we have on offer is so valuable, and it's tried, it's tested, it rings true to all of the things that people say are important, and it's practical and it's doable and all of that. And that's not a guarantee that it will work. Like that's the hard part, is the value of it is not a guarantee that we'll be able to bring all the pieces and parts together. And so there's this sense of fragility, like, there's this wonderful, precious thing that might wither on the vine. And so a lot of what I've been working on just lately is calming my own nervous system, right? In terms of like what we are doing is what we need to do, and we're doing all that we can, and we're open. We continue to be open to feedback and open to pivoting and, you know, uh, flexible in how this is, nothing about this is locked down and we can't do anything else. So, sort of figuring out how to, um, well, take comfort in that, um, in a practical way. Anyhow, over to you, April. Those are my thoughts for now.
Just a couple things about that. I've been thinking about myself lately and my state of generating stuff because I'm very generative and I'm very big picture. So I can be explosive in my thinking and my connecting and all of that sort of stuff, which is great fun for me, but not really useful sometimes for projects. And I've had to learn to be more iterative about it. As I told you last month, if we think about this, can we frame this a little differently? Can I tell you a story? Is there a
Mm,
metaphor
mm,
that matches what's going on for you? And the one that came to mind just now as you were talking, Ben, was that you guys have created this huge storehouse. It's like a big granary. It's notional, but it's still right. It's a product of really hard, fine work over time, using a bunch of different kind of natural resources. And you filled up the granary with this great grain that we know is really filled with nutrition. It's built in all the right ways. It's, a product of regenerative processes and so on. Um, but other people can't find the door to the granary
Mm.
yet. And so some big signs out on the roadside saying, granary this way, or, what would it take for you to get your grain truck to the door of my granary kind of thing. That's the picture that I have in my head at the minute. So any way that we can think of metaphors for what we're
Mm,
doing and then in those metaphors say, so where are the people that we're trying to connect with? Oh, wait a minute, they're over there. They didn't even know we had a granary. Or, there's a competing granary, but it's not a fine one like ours, or whatever it might be. It just kind of helps to sort some of that stuff out, I think. Um, and I forgot what the other thing I was going to say, but I do believe, yeah, that people are out there and they know they need us. They're just not capable of taking that next little step yet. Yet. So working with what that next little step could be, making it so easy, making it like the gopher holes that you fall in and you didn't even know they were there. They're good for gophers, so that's the extent of my thinking, and I'm really curious about what my colleague in the square below me is knitting. Is it going to be a sock?
Yep, it's a sock. Gotta have socks. Um, yeah, I was just thinking of the conversation that we had recently with the uh, potential farm partners, where he seemed to be gushing about what we had and how much it was needed. And because what I need is I need something more concrete, something like what do I do at this point? And because I'm already doing stuff and uh, yeah. So I need to know what to do now. So what what more concrete things can we think up? Um, and I feel that we're also talking about um, vaguely about around uh, some form of promotion for something. Uh, And because we've got a whole bunch of different things, I mean, Ben was just talking about an offer for coming to the pharmastery, and there's also the uh, self-governance thing, and then on top of that, there's also the attracting people to secure the property. Um, yeah. And so it may be that there's stuff that we're talking about that can be applied to, I'm just seeing on the screen the to four potential big investors, three to four timeshare croppers, that kind of thing. Anyway, I just um, trying to figure out how to get more granular and more practical over to Ben.
I feel like there's some kind of resistance going on because we have a list of 30 people, we have a list of at least four timeshare croppers with names and email addresses where we've had conversations with them already. And we have a one-page document that says this is what it would be. And we can work with Aiden to say, here's how you write an email to invite them. I don't know how much more granular you can be. we have 3 to 4 big investors that we can talk to, and on the list, and it's just a matter of crafting the email and setting up the meeting and figuring out what do we present in that meeting. Same thing with we have all of the content for the website and what pages look like. And that's a very granular, very specific task. And we have a menu of webinars, and we have a list of network hosts. And again, working with Aiden, we can craft an email that says, "Hey, we're ready to do these webinars. Let's talk." So I don't know how much more granular you want it to be. It sounds to me like you don't want granular, you want to guarantee that if we do it, somebody will say yes or something like that. Or maybe questioning whether or not that we've got big enough numbers. So we reach out to 3 or 4 people and they all say no, and then what? Um, so those are concerns. Um, and they're not, irrational or anything like that. But I'm not sure how much more granular we can get other than what's it mean? What did we put in the email? So um, yeah, and I do feel like and I feel the same pressure. A lot of this stuff is relatively doable, but partly I have a lot of hesitation when I go to do it because I don't feel the support behind me. And it's more moral support than, having an assistant that I can hand something to. Um, and there are some forms of support that have been offered that we haven't accessed, so Becca has offered to be my wing person on calls, or to talk through things like that. So um I think and this is, and actually, and I think the other part to that too is I don't think we should forget, Roland, you and I should not forget of covering our bases with Plan B stuff. Because I
Mhm.
think some of it is it may feel like we're putting all our eggs in one basket. And and all of these things have if it works, good things will happen. If it doesn't work, what's the fallback? Um, so yeah, over to you, April.
Priorities, because you can't drink from a fire hose. And it's not actually a fire. It just feels like there might be one if you don't drink from the fire hose. So priorities. And the rest of the stuff is all project management, actually. And as long
Mm,
as you don't have too much stuff on your project management matrix, then it's doable and it won't burn anybody out. Um, and it's up, you know, we can decide collectively how much is too much. Um, and if there's one, two, or three things that we must do, what are they? Um, that's that's how I'm feeling about it. You got the goods here. The other thing that I'm thinking, well, all the writing you've been doing, Ben, over time, but certainly in the last, few months, it's been lots of incredible article length pieces that you've been generating. I have this feeling, although this is another another thing to do, it's almost time to put them together for the ebook,
mm,
um,
mm,
and to have them listed that way or formatted that way on the website. Because in the time when people are not able to grasp what they should be doing, when they're immobilized for all sorts of reasons, people will read, and people take comfort in reading. And so having that as a more passive offer for people who need to settle themselves back into who they are and how they do stuff. And again, it's a contradiction. A number of things on this list seem to be contradictions or paradoxes, perhaps. So I find it helpful when I'm feeling crush to sort of try to figure out what the paradox is and what's a third way. Because paradoxes are kind of binary, right? And it's a feeling that if things don't line up in the way that we expect them and all of that, or people don't recognize them or whatever, that then there's these big things that will never come together. It's not true. It's a mental, it's a set, right? A mindset. Um, that's meant to be supportive, but I'm not sure if that's how it came out. And I'm wearing my gloves and my coat because I'm still really cold all the time. But
Hmm.
that too will pass.
It's over to you, Verlon.
Oh, um, well, first I feel like I caused an activation, and that wasn't my intention. I think I was a little, I'm got a bit confused with the granary analogy, and um, I think you're right, Ben. It's the sense of uh, who has our back when we take these actions. Uh, so that's all. Over to you.
Yeah, well, and I'm thinking um, of the list here, because I think we're good to wrap up, and I think the priority question is a good one. And what feel like the priorities for me right now, which I'm saying in the spirit of proposal, we can go around and see whether that makes sense. Um, One of the first priorities for me, but I think it's probably good for us, is to review the Marketing for Hippies framework, because that lays out, here's what we're doing. Here's what's on offer. Here's who we think we're talking to, our different groups. So I think that that can also kind of reorient things. The next would be the website update, and I think that April, it's good to hear that actually. And I've been thinking, it's not necessarily an ebook, but it doesn't need to be. It's basically linking those articles thematically so people can, and I've always wanted to write a hypertext book where it's kind of, you don't have to go from chapter 1 to chapter 10, that you follow the different things. And I think we have that now with the articles, that they can, we can hyperlink. They already are. A lot of them are hyperlinked to each other. And then on the website, it just gives people a pathway in. And that is actually specifically one of the strategies for Marketing for Hippies is people need to, there's comfort and trust building when people can read where we're coming from, even if it's not specifically about this is the offer and here's how it works. In fact, specifically because it's not about that, it sort of gives our worldview, and that allows people to connect with us in a more meaningful way. So number two, one is reviewing the Marketing for Hippies framework. Number two is making the website changes. Number three is finalizing the menu of offerings and the priority list of who our network nodes are. And number four is, and I'm thinking particularly, we've got the Finance Guild, and Heather and Becca have specifically said they are willing to do some lifting. And so really leaning into them on the outreach that happens to the investors. Um, and especially the first level of outreach that we want to do is Heather's language is it's kind of like the used car salesman, what would it take to get you in this car today? But I think that is, it's really like what would you need to connect to this? And so those I think would be the four priorities that I would put up there. Um, And of course, having said that, I was like, oh, but then there's the lifeboat builders, and where did they fit? But I think that those are the four priorities. And just because those are the priorities doesn't mean other things can't happen as well. So that's my proposal. And over to you, April.
Um, Either add to your priorities or take one away if there's too much there already. One of the other priorities that needs to be addressed and addressed continually is your plan B.
Mm,
Simply to help your spirits be buoyed in whatever way that will do that. So I think there maybe should be, in the same way that we check back with North Star to keep on track all the time. I think we should simply make your plan B, whatever that is, and you can keep that as private as you want to, um, that always be part of the planning and the meetings and all of that.
mm, mm,
It needs to be up there on one of the priorities, or else we're not treating you guys respectfully. I take care of my plan B. I make time for it. Over to Mr. Sock.
For the uh the ebook, if it's helpful at all, the order in which I've been posting the articles on social media is um, rational. It's not random. It's one feeding into the other, and Aiden and I have developed a system to for arcs. If that's useful, I can share that. There can also be hints in the captions that I put in for the articles also. So if those are additional resources that could be useful, then I can definitely make them available. And I accept the proposal.
mm.
Uh, Over to Ben.
Yeah, I think that's brilliant because then that really is it's how do we translate all that work that you're doing with Aiden on the themes and the arcs and just put it on a web page. Like that's really and it can be even, picking the captions. It's telling the story with story, it's an epic. So it's giving the whole arc, and then there are, subquests, you know, where people can go into each of the things in more detail. So yeah, I think that is directly like I think we just take that and you know, so we translate it from social media into a static page. Um, yeah, that's great. And a lot of this stuff too, I mean, I think I don't think I think this is one of those cases of that task that I was putting off for 4 years, I just did, and it took me 20 minutes. I think a lot of this stuff is it takes more energy to get up to doing it than it takes to do it. Um, so, there's an element here of kind of hold your nose and do some stuff, rip the Band-Aid off and all of that. All right, so it seems like I didn't hear any objections to that. I had an addition to the plan, to the priorities, which is the Plan B, which likewise um, I don't think it's actually much of an addition. I think it's woven into some of these other things. Like I'm thinking in particular, us getting training in doing either IFOT or ITFL, getting certified for that, that becomes part of our Plan B. That we can do coaching for, ITFL coaching. Um, that becomes another element of Plan B. So anyhow, it feels to me like we're ready to wrap up. And so let's just go once through on any loose ends, anything hanging that you want to cover. April, over to you.
Well, I want to present badges or tokens or post-it notes or whatever, however this should be represented for whoever it is that is putting out the images and the quotes. Uh, you're pointing at the top of my head on my screen. But
Pointing to the
Good
top.
job,
I'm
April.
pointing to the top of
Well
Roland's
done,
head.
April.
top of Roland's head. Well, thank you. I watch for those every day, and I send them out on all my social media things deliberately because I think they are beautiful, they are invitational, and they just hit at the heart of what this is about. So beautifully communicated and messaged and imaged, Mr. Sock.
Mhm.
That's it.
Well, thanks for that, and I'm curious about how you're sharing them. I'm just it's mysterious to me how all of this works because it doesn't look like there's a lot of uptake. Likes or shares, I can see how that works, and I haven't seen any shares. So anyway, and it might not actually be a good way of doing it because I noticed that if you're doing it on Facebook, shares tend to not show up as much on your pages. So I'm not a fan of Facebook. Really not a fan of Facebook. Uh, oh, Zelda's upstairs. Hi, Booby. Um, yeah. So if anyone has any insights on how to track, I think I figured out how to see how many people see our posts, not click on, but see our posts on Instagram. But everything else is a mystery. Mastodon, Blue Sky, Facebook, the group on Facebook, I can't tell how to tell if it's actually generating anything. Anyway, over to Ben.
Mhm. Yeah, well, I'm not the person to answer those questions. So I I never, I used to be a technophile, and now I'm moving into if not a Luddite, definitely a techno curmudgeon. So um anyhow, I embrace my inner curmudgeon.
Techno Technomudgeon?
Tech
Technomudgeon.
cryptomudgeon. All right. Anyhow, I think we're good, Ben. And last thoughts for the good of the cause. Over to you, April.
Thank you. I really liked being with you and look forward to our next opportunity to meet. Thanks.
Keep warm, keep going, keep it simple. Over to Ben.
Yeah. Lots of rest, and that's not just to you, April. That's these are times that call for lots of rest and good self-care and all that stuff. So, all right, excellent. Well, thank you all, and we'll see you again soon. Bye bye.